What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Orange Press Pass podcast. And we've got a lot to unpack tonight as Syracuse lost 30-0 tonight to the Louisville Cardinals on the road. They dropped to 1-8 now on the season, just 2 years after winning 10 games and the Camping World Bowl just 2 years ago. Eric Moon here with Tom Russo and Chris Sacchi. And before we get going, a quick reminder, be sure to give us a follow on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and apparently we have a TikTok now. I didn't know we had that before. I think we're moving ahead in social media, I guess. Anyway, you can follow us on all those platforms at CitrusTV Sports. So, guys, it was a Friday night game tonight. Under the lights, certainly one of those games that reminds you of high school football. And at times, it did look like a high school game tonight. But I want to know what you guys thought of this one. What are your first impressions of the Syracuse 30-0 loss tonight?
Well, mine is pretty simple. Don't call them the Syracuse Orange. Call them the Syracuse Range, guys. This team does not have an O. It was abysmal on the offensive side of the ball. 3.3 yards per play, 137 yards over the entirety of a football game. It looked like a high school offense out there, and you could tell that this team has just not been able to get it going under the freshman quarterback. We're going to get into it, Jacoby Morgan, but right now, this team just does not have an offense, and that's a problem when you have an offensive-minded head coach in Dino Babers. You really just have to find a way to make this offense go if you're going to stick with Jacoby Morgan going forward.
Yeah, guys, when you think Friday Night Lights, you think excitement, fun, a close game, and it was anything but. And for Syracuse, coming off of a bye week with an extra week of reps for your freshman quarterback, you expected anything but a goose egg. I mean, something on the offensive end. And after the bye week last year, Syracuse went 2-1 to finish the season, scored at least 34 points in every game. And for a Syracuse team that's only won one game all year so far, you expected this to be the closest game, and it was an absolute blowout. The first time Syracuse had been shut out since Clemson 4 seasons ago. A depressing game is really all we can say, which sets up a show to where Tom and I, and you too, Eric, will not be very happy.
No, we won't be. And it's really interesting with this team, too, because I think we can all agree this was their best chance to get a win before the end of this season. And it ended up being a 30-point loss to a 2-win Louisville team. Tom, you mentioned the quarterbacks talk, and we have a lot to unpack there with what happened tonight in Louisville, specifically with Jacoby Morgan in the third quarter going down with an injury after getting hit hard on a sack and fumbling the football. And Rex Culpepper came in after that for a couple series. Dylan Markowitz even played the final series of the game. What is the outlook now at the quarterback position going forward with Morgan now nursing perhaps a concussion?
I mean, you would imagine that Rex Culpepper is probably the guy if Morgan doesn't come back. He'd been the starter after DeVito went down initially, and he really didn't do anything special. I mean, he had a couple of big-time touchdown throws down the sideline when Taj Harris broke free. But other than that, not only did he have nothing worth writing home about, he really just played overall bad football for Syracuse. And that's been the bottom line at quarterback all season. Whoever has been under center for Syracuse has struggled mightily. They have not been able to get anything more than a few big plays. And we see it every single week. There's this one 60-yard touchdown down the sideline to Taj Harris or somebody, and we're like, oh, here comes the Syracuse offense, and it just doesn't happen.
Yes, I mean, but something that I need to preface about quarterback talk before anything, like you said, Eric, we saw Jacoby Morgan leave the game with an injury. This offensive line has done nothing but hurt these quarterbacks in a literal sense. This is the third quarterback that has left a football game due to injury this season, or in Rex Culpepper's case, couldn't start the next game because of injury, entering play 104th out of 126 teams in pass blocking, according to PFF. And that was, in Morgan's case, another injury for Syracuse. And the first drive of the game was the omen for me. It's 3rd and 4. Syracuse has a chance to get a third down conversion. Of course, they didn't get one until the final drive of the game, and Morgan was sacked. And that sack and then the sack to hurt Jacoby, and to me, victimized him, as well as the mistakes that couldn't really get him into a groove. Those mistakes being Nykeem Johnson's fumble on a return on a kickoff, as well as Taj Harris's drop, which would have been a first down. Instead, it was an interception.
Yeah,
go ahead, Tom.
Morgan really struggled a lot in this game. If you look at it strictly on the stat sheet, he only went 4 for 12. He struggled with the interception. But, again, you can't put the interception on him. That was on Taj Harris for dropping the football. and he was under constant duress. If you expect a freshman quarterback to be under that much pressure the way he was tonight and be able to be pinpoint accurate and successful, it's just not going to happen. And we saw it with Morgan tonight.
There's no way you can put this kind of offensive failure tonight squarely on the shoulders of Jacoby Morgan. Yeah, it wasn't a great night for him, but you can't put it squarely on his shoulders. He had a couple of good throws despite the completion percentage being below 50%. I think part of this also goes back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago when Jacoby Morgan really broke out against Wake Forest with that 7-for-7 drive and a touchdown at the end of that game. Ended up starting the next week against Boston College. Where are you going with this if you're Dino Babers? Are you going to the future with Jacoby and Morgan, perhaps, depending on the injury, of course? Are you going with the experience with the senior Rex Culpepper to end the season in these final two games?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now over these past two games, BC and Louisville, is sort of the true Jacoby and Morgan. I think that everyone got so excited seeing him lead that one drive at the end of Wake Forest, but Wake Forest didn't prepare for Jacoby and Morgan. They prepared for Rex Culpepper as a different style of quarterback. If you prepare for one guy and suddenly you get a drive of another guy that you weren't expecting and there's no film on him, because remember, that was the first time anyone had seen Jacoby and Morgan outside of high school, so they had no idea what to expect. So, yeah, he goes 7-for-7. He leads a touchdown drive in what was garbage time for all intents and purposes. So it's not like Wake Forest was playing as if the game was on the line. So I think that we have to take that drive that is sort of the banner that makes everyone say Jacoby and Morgan, the guy going forward. You have to take that with a grain of salt and say maybe he's not quite there yet, because what we've seen the past 2 weeks has shown me he's not ready to be the starting quarterback. Will he be after an off season of preparation and going into his sophomore season? I think he could be. I think he could be the guy for Syracuse going forward, but he's not there right now.
Yeah, Tom, it's really a fascinating quandary at quarterback for Syracuse. I mean, you still have Tom DeVito. We think he will come back next year. You also have Justin Lampson, which was a big get for Syracuse at the quarterback position, kind of an Eric Dungy type, is somebody who maybe could fill in those shoes. But, of course, he'll be a freshman next season. And we see right now just how much a freshman quarterback could struggle at that position. I think Morgan was good enough last weekend against BC in a narrow 3-point loss. And this week, look, when you have a time of possession that is basically, when you round things up, 48 versus 12, there's just not enough chances for him. I mentioned earlier the mistakes that victimized him, but also the defense just allowing these other teams, last week Boston College, this week Louisville, to just run the ball all over the field. There's a game plan against Syracuse. It's run the ball, and run it some more, and then you control the clock. I mean, when you have 12 minutes of possession total, that just isn't enough plays for the guy. He only threw the ball 12 times today. So, look, I think I mentioned the offensive line, now the defense and the turnovers and the mistakes. This guy just is not set up for success. He battled last week, and this week he was just a non-starter. It's hard to tell, and I think with these last two games, he has to continue starting if he's healthy, because there's just not enough of a sample size for the guy to really know what he's got.
Now, Chris, you foreshadowed the offensive line a little bit. Let's talk about them for just a second, because obviously with these quarterbacks getting hurt, with DeVito suffering a season-ending injury, Culpepper was hurt a couple weeks ago, appears to be healthy now. He was active on the bench tonight and came into the game. Jacoby Morgan now potentially hurt. This offensive line has had some major struggles this year. How much of this is on the O-line?
I'll have to say it's primarily the reason that this team is struggling. I mean, and the offense is struggling. You can't get anything going. We mentioned how Syracuse was woeful on third down. Louisville today had 2 fourth-down conversions before Syracuse can get its own third-down conversion. And a lot of that comes from when you can't run the ball primarily effectively, even though Sean Tucker, as we'll talk about later, has been great. You're in a lot of holes, 2nd and long, 3rd and long. I mean, look, Chris Elmore, that decision to move him from a fullback tight end type to offensive line to begin the year tells you all you need to know. Chris Blake, his waiver was declined. He would have been a nice role here for this team. Other players, Sam Heckel announced his retirement after an undisclosed injury last fall. Anthony Redd, he tore his Achilles before the year. So there's just no depth on this line. It's been one of the worst in the country for the past 2 seasons. And, I mean, I have to say it again. I know I mentioned it earlier. 3 quarterbacks have gotten hurt this year on blindside hits or difficult hits. It just goes to show you that no matter who's back there, they're just not set up for success. I will say it is the primary cause for everybody struggling on offense this year.
Here's a number for you. 32 sacks. That is how many Syracuse has given up this season. The quarterbacks, no matter who has been under center, have not had time to throw the football. It's honestly incredible to me that Sean Tucker has been able to find any running room when you have a guy who has played fullback, tight end, defensive end, and now guard for this football team in Chris Elmore, who's a fan favorite because he's all over the field. But that's not exactly what you want in an offensive line. You want a guy who's a rock, who's been there the entire time, who's always there, and a guy you can always count on. And the bottom line is Syracuse has not had that. They haven't had it for multiple seasons now. And we're seeing it. We saw it back in the Eric Dungy days. The offensive line was part of the reason Dungy was always getting injured because they simply couldn't block then. They still can't block. It's a major problem. We always say football games are won in the trenches. It's a cliche, but it's true. And if you don't have an offensive line that can protect the quarterback, open up the running game, and that leads to the play action pass and everything moving off of it, it all starts with the snap of the football, with the center, with the offensive line. If you don't have something there, you won't succeed. We've seen it. They're 1-8 for a reason.
You mentioned that. Go ahead, Chris.
Real quick on the line. There's one last point in this. A lot of times in this game, Louisville would show blitz and then move back in coverage. I mean, imagine you're Jacoby and Morgan. You know how bad this offensive line has been, and you see 5-6 guys close to the line. You're going to be terrified to throw the football, and then everyone drops back in coverage. And, hey, even if 3 guys rush, if 2 guys rush, he's still in duress. So, like Tom mentioned, a lot of things happen because the line doesn't work, and that's just another factor.
And remember, you have a freshman quarterback. They aren't as familiar with dealing with pressure, aren't as familiar with audibling and changing the play. So when you've got 5, 6, 7 Cardinals up at the line of scrimmage, regardless of what's coming, a freshman's just going to automatically assume it's a blitz. If they drop into coverage, that often leads to a lot of the incompletions and the interceptions that we saw.
And you bring up a great point, Tom, because frankly, during most of this game tonight, especially in the second and third quarters, when Louisville really pulled away from Syracuse, it looked like Syracuse was the high school football team getting thrown around by an actual D1 football team in the Louisville Cardinals. It was really not even fair at some points during the game tonight. And that's where you get stats like this, where Syracuse entering this game tonight had 260-plus yards per game total offensively. That number is definitely going down after the kind of night they had offensively tonight. The next worst offense in the ACC is Pitt, and they're averaging almost 100 yards per game more than Syracuse. So that difference in the ACC is being felt, and that's certainly being felt around the country as well. We've talked a lot of negatives about this team and this offense in particular so far. Let's talk about a big positive this season, and he looks to be a workhorse for Syracuse for these final 2 games as well. How about Sean Tucker, the biggest bright spot of this team, this offense this year? What do you guys make of his performance, 93 yards tonight, and his performance all season?
I mean, he's the only bright spot for this team right now. Not, like you said, 93 yards. And I did some quick math here with my calculator because you guys know I don't know how to math. But doing the math, 93 divided by 137, he had 2/3 of this team's offense. And he did it on how many carries, you ask? Well, I'll tell you how many carries. He did it on exactly 16 carries. 16 of the 41 plays were Sean Tucker, and he got 2/3 of the offense. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that sounds like a ridiculous stat to me. There is no reason why. We talked about this offensive line, how abysmal it is. There's no reason why he should be able to produce at the level he is. It really looks like that Syracuse has found a sort of diamond in the rough here with this Sean Tucker kid. And I think that he's going to be a workhorse moving forward. He should be a workhorse moving forward. You're doing a terrible job if you're not featuring this guy. So he should be getting the ball as much as Syracuse can handle it because he's the only way you're going to take pressure off of Jacoby and Morgan or whoever is behind the center.
Yeah, let's say the obvious here. Maybe not the obvious, but something I've been burning on for a little while. Sean Tucker is a star. I mean, this guy, like Tom said, he's the offense right now. He's the only piece that you can look at with positivity. The line today was the bottom 10 in the nation in terms of run blocking, and yet he had another huge game, 5.8 yards per carry. and when the squad, Louisville, is lined up in the box wanting to stop him because, like we're saying, he's the only guy on offense. 16 carries, 93 yards. That's 5.8. Like I said, I mean, I will give a little love to the Ostrom Avenue podcast here. They had his high school coach on, and his high school coach says Sean Tucker can play on Sundays. This guy was elite at track and field when he was in high school. He's shown great speed and an ability to break tackles. A superstar level player. There's just not much else I can say. This guy is the offense, and the only unfortunate thing was today we couldn't see more out of Tucker because the team was trailing so much. We all know when you're trailing, you need to throw the ball, try to get some long plays. So you only got those 16 carries. What if he got 20, 25? Maybe he breaks the century mark again. Look, Sean Tucker, to me, is a star with a capital S.
Yeah, Tucker has been absolutely phenomenal for the Orange this year. Something that I don't think a lot of fans will notice about Tucker from tonight's performance, at least, for a guy to be a star, you have to produce in the big time moments, of course. That's an obvious statement. Like Trevor Lawrence is always going to perform in the big moments. Mac Jones is always going to perform in the big moments. But for a star to perform, you also have to play at your highest ability when you're playing in a game that's an absolute dud like this one. And Sean Tucker showed up tonight when nobody else did. And I think that shows a lot about him as a player and him as a workhorse with the kind of work ethic that he shows. Let's move on to Louisville for just a second. They have a star player of their own, a star quarterback in Malik Cunningham. And tonight he had some struggles. He got the job done. He wasn't great, especially in that first quarter. He had a lot of struggles in the passing game. Wasn't great tonight, but he was good enough to get the job done. What did you guys make of his performance?
I think that his biggest asset, not unlike another Louisville quarterback that everyone loves to show highlights of playing against Syracuse on a Friday night, no less, in Lamar Jackson, he runs the football at an exceptional level. Malik Cunningham is an outstanding runner with the ball, and we saw him when the opportunity was there. He took it, and he took advantage of that shoddy Syracuse run defense. But what I saw from Malik Cunningham as far as a passer today, if I'm an NFL scout, I'm worried because he made a lot of questionable decisions when he really didn't have to. The play that sticks out to me right at the end of the second half, you just got the ball back off a turnover, and what do? You throw it up into double coverage twice. You get away with it once, you don't get it away with it the second time. You can't throw the ball up into double coverage in a situation like that. The other interception that we saw was also a bad throw. It was behind his receiver. Obviously a great play on it by Garrett Williams to tip it to himself and make that play, but it was behind the receiver. A better throw, it would have possibly gone for 6. You have to be able to hit those throws if you're going to succeed at the next level. And obviously Cunningham still has some refining to do going forward, but he's been a great player before for Louisville. I think he will continue to improve as time goes on. We saw obviously he got injured this year. I think that might be part of it, that he's not 100% still. But I think that he's got the pieces to move forward like Lamar Jackson. But from what I saw tonight, I was not impressed, especially against Syracuse.
You know what, Tom? I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but at the end of the day, he did enough and more than enough to put up a 30 spot with this offense. And you look at his throwing stats, 19 for 28 is pretty good. I know he had those 2 picks, but there were a couple of plays where, late in the third quarter, Ahmad Greenwood was beat and right off the wide receiver's fingertips. There was another play just like that earlier in the game to where he could have had those 2 touchdowns, or maybe even just one of them when the receiver catches the football. And look, this is a guy who, like you said, his main asset is his running ability, but he had the rushing touchdown today. And this is a man who leads a Louisville offense that's over 50% on 4th down. That's why we saw them on 4th and 5 early in the game convert, or it was actually early in the second quarter with 14-10 left on a 4th and 5 convert against the Syracuse beatdown defense. So look, it wasn't pretty today, but he also could have had a couple better throws and receptions on those deep balls. And look, he did just enough to win the game, control the game, use his running just enough, didn't throw his body around. I like what I saw from Cunningham enough. I mean, he had a 3rd and 12 first down run in the first quarter, late in the first quarter too. So this is somebody who looked like he was comfortable. He knew when to throw it. He knew when to run the ball. I think he could be a guy that maybe Jacoby Morgan models his game after in terms of knowing when to throw it and when to run it, because we saw Morgan on a 3rd and 13 try to run the ball and get a big hit when he really didn't need to. A 3rd and 13 with nowhere to go. He could have just thrown it away. So things like that, I think Cunningham did just enough to win. And it doesn't hurt when you're put up a 30 spot, especially going into the game with only one conference win.
Yeah, Cunningham's definitely a guy that Morgan can learn a little bit from. And I want to go back to the BC game for just a second, because I think for parts of the game tonight, Cunningham's performance, especially when he struggled, was pretty similar to what we saw from Phil Jerkovic 2 weeks ago, when he didn't exactly look like himself for BC against Syracuse. You know, it was a closer game in that one, ended up being decided by a field goal, but Jerkovic got the job done again in that one as well for the Eagles. Jerkovic and Cunningham are two guys that, even when they don't have their best, they seem to find a way to get points on the board. And in Cunningham's case tonight, once he got going after only 36 passing yards in the first quarter, he got comfortable, and so did the offense, and that's when the Cardinals started to pull away. One other factor in this game. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, yeah, before you jump into the one other factor, this has been back-to-back weeks where teams have rushed the ball over 40 times against Syracuse and have almost tripled Syracuse in terms of time of possession. So, look, when you're a quarterback, like you said, Jurkovic wasn't perfect, Cunningham wasn't perfect, but when you're just controlling the football, look, they only averaged 3 yards per carry, but just had the ball for so long. You don't need to be perfect when you run so many plays. In comparison to Syracuse, when you have the ball 42 minutes of a football game, you don't need to be perfect. Syracuse ran 41 plays, Louisville ran 79. So look, when you have that much of a volume on your plate, it doesn't matter if you're perfect or not. You can be okay. And I think that's the game plan against Syracuse now, because with Morgan, they're playing so quickly. The other team can take advantage of that, of those quick 3 and outs. You know, we know Syracuse can't convert on third. Just run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. You don't need to be efficient. You need just to run a lot of plays. I mean, 79 plays, doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to be doing enough to win, especially against this battered Syracuse defense.
Yeah, I think what you can definitely say about this defense, this brand new defense we should mention under Tony White, the 3-3-5, you know, despite the number of points allowed this season, this defense has really impressed and certainly has a bright future with all of those underclassmen already performing, especially a guy like Garrett Williams, who had a fantastic interception tonight. And you go back to the Clemson game, he had the pick 6 in that one as well. So that's enough from the Louisville game, at least for the moment. Let's move on to next week. The second to last game of the year for the Orange, their final game in the Dome, at least in 2020. They're going to take on a pretty good team. That's the NC State Wolfpack. They're 5-3. They got a big game tomorrow as well against number 21 Liberty. What are you looking for from Syracuse in that one? Remember, they're 1-8 now, so you kind of have to be looking to the future, I would think.
Yeah, I'd like to be looking to the future, but I don't think the future is NC State. I think the future that you're looking to is 2021. Because at this stage in the game, this is a lost season for Syracuse. I don't think they have much of a shot against the Wolfpack, another team that has 2 guys who have rushed for over 400 yards on the year, Zonovan Knight and Ricky Person. And that's been the game. If you can run against Syracuse, you're going to beat Syracuse, and that's without even talking about Emeka Emezi, that great receiver that they have down in Raleigh. So I think that this is just going to be another rough game for Syracuse. But hey, basketball season is coming, Orange fans. Basketball season is coming.
Yeah, what you just said, basketball season is on the way, might be the biggest takeaway as we go into next week. But, I mean, look, there are 2 more games left. If Jacoby Morgan is healthy, you'd like him to start those 2 games. You know, and progress as a quarterback is not always linear and forward. You know, for Jacoby and Morgan, you can take some step backs, you can take some lumps and learn from them. So I think that's the biggest deal, is the quarterback position. Look, DeVito might be back next year. Looks like in all likelihood he will be, and he will be healthy. But Morgan is still somebody you want to see and invest into your future. I'm really interested to see tomorrow's game against Liberty. And Liberty's 8-0 on the year. They're been red hot since the start. We saw them really beat up on Syracuse earlier on. NC State is 5-3, but if they have that win, that's big. And like Tom said, if you could run the ball against Syracuse, there's a formula for success. It's control the football and gas the defense, which is the best part of the Syracuse team. NC State has a good chance to do so. So I'm worried about this game. And one last thing that I'll say about NC State that I mentioned earlier is after the bye last year, Syracuse really flipped the switch, gave you some positive momentum into this year, gave you some encouragement to think, okay, maybe 2020 will be better. And instead, after the bye week, this team took a step back against arguably its worst opponent. Record-wise, that's the case this year. So maybe another week of practice will help this team. But it does give you some questions as to what happened during the bye and why couldn't they improve at all. This was a massive step back. The worst game of the season against your worst opponent is a recipe for disaster going into a pretty solid NC State team next week.
Yeah, and what seems like a lost season now for the Syracuse football team, I think what you have to do now is just get guys experience. Morgan has got to start if he's healthy, of course. You got to make sure that he's healthy in order to play him. Maybe you give Culpepper some time as well. Remember, this is Culpepper's senior year. Yeah, he's not the future, but he may get another game or two just to wrap up, his college career and all that. And you got to get those underclassmen some more experience and think about 2021 and try and improve on what so far is a one-win season. And you talk about that game between NC State and Liberty. I mean, there's a lot of great games this weekend, but that's one that nobody's talking about that might be one of the best games of the weekend with Liberty visiting the Wolfpack tomorrow.
Yeah, prime time, 7:30 against a Liberty team with Hugh Freeze that is in the top 25 now. And you look at that program just a couple of years into being a legit football program, and it's really something that I'm excited to see. You're right, kind of an underrated game because these two teams aren't exactly on the radar when it comes to postseason play and the college football playoff. But for Syracuse fans here in the Hill, I mean, this is huge. Somebody who Syracuse got throttled by earlier in Syracuse's next opponent. So if you're looking for, something on a Saturday because Syracuse played today and you're a big football fan, that's one that I'll certainly be watching in prime time, 7:30 kickoff tomorrow.
All right, let's move on to we're wrapping things up now here on the Orange Press Pass podcast. Let's move on to your guys' final thoughts. 30-0 the final, Louisville over Syracuse tonight in shutout fashion. Statistically, perhaps Syracuse's worst loss, one of the worst losses certainly this season for the Orange in a season of many losses. What are you guys' final thoughts from this one?
Yeah, mine is pretty simple. It's figure out what's going to happen going forward. You need to figure out your quarterback situation. Is Jacobian Morgan your guy? And one would have hoped, we mentioned that they are coming off a bye. You would have expected them to have given more preparation to Morgan, really get him ready, and he did not look ready for this game. He looked rattled. He looked off really throughout the entire game. And I think that if you are Dino Babers and you are this coaching staff, your priority needs to be, if Morgan is your guy going forward, you have to get him to the point where he can be starting Atlantic Coast Conference games, not just any games, but games against the top-tier opponents, because that's what he's going to have to do going forward. Obviously, DeVito's got at least a year left, so maybe we won't see Morgan next year, but he is the future of Syracuse. Then you have to start focusing on that right now.
Yeah, Tom, I like how you mentioned the coaching staff because, after a season and during a season, which has been just so difficult for fans here in the Hill, maybe a lot of people calling for Dino's job. And my final thought is you hold the brakes on that a little bit. I mean, Baber said it himself in the press conference heading into this week's game that this year really deserves an asterisk. I mean, you think about Syracuse football heading into this 2020 season where there's less in-person meetings, less in-person conversation with two new coordinators at both sides. I mean, that is a recipe for something really difficult. And like I said, the bye week coming out of that struggling so bad is troublesome, yes. The recruiting is a little bit troublesome, yes. But also, you have to pay Dino Babers a lot of money not to coach this team if you really cut the axe going into this year. I mean, Babers still is coming off a season. Let's not forget 2018, a 10-win year and a bowl victory. In college football, things can change quickly, as we've seen with the Syracuse program. Halt the brakes on Babers' job security. I understand how tough this year has been, but not just yet. Let's give it maybe one more season. Let's give it an off season. And actually, let's give it this week of practice, too, to see maybe how things develop.
And we certainly have to keep in mind that this is indeed 2020. And going back to something Dino Babers said very early in the season, the week of their first game against North Carolina, just getting through this season would be a great thing. And this Syracuse team, obviously there's still 2 games left in this season, but so far to get this far through the season is really an accomplishment in itself, despite the underwhelming performance on the field and a lot of growing pains for sure. So that's going to do it for us here on the Orange Press Pass podcast. Before we go, we want to give a quick shout out to our great Orange Press Pass producers, Tyler Melito, Josh Golden, Trey Redfield, and yes, even Tom Russo. He's on the podcast tonight.
I don't
This
know
is their
why,
final. Go ahead, Tom.
I don't know why y'all are thanking me, but
This is their final Orange Press Pass as a crew. And we just want to thank you guys for all the great work you've put into this show this year, especially given the circumstances with the pandemic. We've all fought through it, and you guys have made it a great year of Orange Press Pass through it all. So thank you guys for a great year. That does it for us. For Tom Russo and Chris Sacchi, I'm Eric Moon saying so long, stay safe, and have a great and happy holiday season. Thanks for watching, guys.